Hi, everybody. Welcome to a special edition of Blaze Baking with Rach. We're actually broadcasting earlier than usual for sort of our summer hours. And also because we're making blueberry muffins, which are a fun summer treat. And so it's 11 a.m. East Coast. It's 8 a.m. West Coast, which is where Stephanie's coming from her kitchen. And I'm gonna introduce Stephanie and get to our usual business and get to the muffins, of course. But I just felt I really, had to say something about the news yesterday that came out of the Supreme Court. You can see our special logo up there in the right-hand corner. A Mighty Blaze has and always will support women's rights. We do. We're founded on, quality of all kinds. And we are later in the show going to be posting some links for ways that you can support in any work that you do or giving or anything that, any way you can give of yourself to support a woman's right. And I will say, baking for me has always been therapeutic. That's one of the reasons that we started the show during the pandemic when everybody was completely overwhelmed by life and scared and didn't know what to do. We got in the kitchen and we started baking. And I also am going to piggyback on something that Stephanie said yesterday on Facebook, which is the news is bad. Like, let's just get baking. That's not to say that we're not going to get out there and fight for what we believe in, because we will. But for this morning, we're going to bake and we're going to talk about Stephanie's book, The Migraine Relief Plan, which I have dog-eared like every other page. And let me first introduce Stephanie. We're going to get talking and baking. I'm going to put my glasses on for this part. So Stephanie Weaver, MPH, is a writer, speaking coach, and recipe developer based in San Diego, California. She has a master's of public health and nutrition education, from the University of Illinois. She's the host of the Blue and Yellow Kitchen, which we're going to talk about, even though her kitchen's not blue and yellow anymore, and the Resilience series, both on Facebook, Watch, and IGTV. And her recipes have been featured in Cosmopolitan, Bon Appetit, Cooking Light, Parade, and more. Welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you so much for having me, Rachel.
It's great to have you here. And I'm excited about your new book, which is called The Migraine Relief Plan Cookbook, which officially goes on sale in July. But I think people can pre-order now and it's starting to ship. Is that right?
That's correct. Yep.
Yes. Yeah. So anyway, as all of our viewers know, I'm going to be baking the actual muffins here in my kitchen, and I'm going to move us along as we go. But before I get started with the steps, I should say, if you're baking with us at home, it's a good time now to preheat your oven to 425 because it takes a little bit. I'm already preheated. And you could also line your muffin tin with the liners. It should make about 12, so you should be good to go. But can you tell us kind of I know this is an overused word, but your journey was sort of writing recipes and developing recipes for migraine relief and other kind of anti-inflammatory type recipes for various, chronic illnesses?
Sure. So I've been sort of renovating recipes to make them healthier for myself for about 30 years. The first project I worked on after I got out of public health school was actually a cholesterol study with kids. And so at that point in time, we were taking all the fat out of everything and putting sugar in its place. And now we know that's all wrong. Nutrition science keeps changing, but it's always been a love of mine. And in 2010, I got inspired to start a food blog. And at the time, it was going to be gluten-free recipes that were, kind of healthier, renovated recipes. And after 2 or 3 years, so when I was 53, I was finally diagnosed with migraine disease. And I'd had what I thought were weather headaches my whole life. I now know that I think I had abdominal migraine, which is how it often shows up in children pre-puberty. They also think colic in babies is maybe the first incidence of migraine showing up. And so I just had these terrible headaches whenever the weather changed and never really thought about like getting help for that or, it just didn't really occur to me. I was never diagnosed until I started having vertigo attacks when I was 53. And so I ended up having to take time off from the blog because I had to figure out how to feed myself. The first thing that happened was the doctor gave me a migraine diet sheet, which was 3 pages. It was basically just a chart of here's what you can eat and here's what you can't eat. And I got home from that 4-hour appointment And 75% of what was in my refrigerator was in the do not eat column. So I stood in my kitchen and I cried. And then I slowly, as the medication they put me on started helping, and I started following a kind of my own version of that. Essentially, it's an elimination diet where you're trying to figure out, are there foods that are bothering you or not? I ordered every book that was available on Amazon. And while they were all helpful in different ways, none of them was a systematic approach to changing lifestyle. And so the first book that I wrote, the Migraine, well, it was my third book, but the first book about this, the Migraine Relief Plan, is an 8-week plan that helps people set up those lifestyle changes. And then after a few months, you can kind of see, well, what's really helping? And then you can add the foods back in. So the goal is not to stay on the elimination diet long term. It's to use it as a tool, kind of do a science experiment on yourself. And my feeling is, those 6 months are going to go by either way. So if I end up at the end, with significantly fewer migraine attack days, then that's a win, right? And so it goes through all those different things and to explain a lot of detail in the first book. And then the cookbook really came out of readers saying, we need more recipes for snacks. We need more recipes that we can make in bulk and freeze. And we don't want to cook as much. So can we make one, can you give us recipes that you can use the leftovers from? So that's where the cookbook came from. And I'm very excited because it's a full color cookbook. It's absolutely stunning.
Beautiful.
My friend, I was able to utilize my friend Laura Bashar of Family Spice to photograph it. And then the Surrey Books has an incredible designer that they work with. And so it's absolutely, I had nothing to do with how it looks, except I kind of art directed it in the sense, but it's just beautiful. So I wanted it to feel really light and bright and celebratory because a lot of us are light sensitive. We end up alone in the dark a lot. And I oftentimes miss parties and things. And so I wanted it to feel like you would be excited to open it and cook something. There's also quotes from my Resilience series sprinkled throughout the book that are really meant to just kind of give you a lift when you're having a hard day. And thank you. So they're from doctors and all kinds of people who are in the migraine community, people who have lupus, people who have other chronic illnesses, who have, just gone through hard things. And so that series was kind of generated through this cookbook project as well.
I have to say, for the baking show, I've interviewed so many different authors and so many different books and cookbooks. And I love the flow of this book. First of all, the beautiful pictures. And here are the blueberry muffins that we're going to get started making. Sorry, I haven't.
So that's what they look like when Laura shoots them. And this is what they look like when I make them.
Okay.
They're yummy, but they're not as beautiful as when Laura shoots them.
It's a great read because in the beginning, you sort of talk about your journey and the plan and how to do this. Then you get into the recipes, but throughout you have these quotes, which are great. And it's a great read. I love to read cookbooks, but I really enjoyed it. So we actually are going to get started with some of the ingredients. So we have first in our dry ingredients, 1 cup and 3/4 of a cup of gluten-free flour, right? So I have that in here already. And I use, not to be an ad for anything, I use the Bob's Red Mill 1-to-1, which I often use. And you recommend that in your book, right?
Yeah, it's the most consistent results that I've had. And I've tried all of the blends. And I do have my own blend in the book. So if you want to make your own, that's great. Okay. You can do that.
I bake gluten-free all the time, so I'm used to that. To that, we're going to add a tablespoon of baking powder, regular or sodium-free. I have to say mine is not sodium free, but this is what I had.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah. So some people with vertigo have to go on pretty strictly low sodium diets. It's helpful because it helps with the fluid in your inner ear. And so that's how I discovered the sodium free baking powder. But all the recipes have been tested with both, and they're successful with both.
Okay. No, it's interesting as we go through the ingredients, you can tell us why. These muffins are gluten-free and sugar-free. They're
very low sodium, very low sugar. And so they're I'll explain a little bit as you go. I'll let you continue.
Instead of your traditional sugar, we're using coconut sugar.
Which is lower glycemic.
Right. So I have a 1/4 cup of the coconut sugar plus 2 tablespoons for everybody at home. So I'm going to add that. And nowadays, this at the grocery store, online, there's so many different types of sugars, right? There's coconut and different kinds of milks and things like that. So that it makes life easier these days, I would say.
Absolutely. I mean, you can buy it at, even chains like Trader Joe's has coconut sugar
Yeah.
most of the time. It's a lower glycemic sugar. And so for the desserts, this is in the snacks chapter, but for the desserts in both of my books, I call them fruit forward, most of them. So you're using the natural sweetness from the fruit, like the blueberries. There's a small amount of sugar in this one, particularly just for the binding properties that sugar provides, and also the caramelization on the top. And then there's a little bit of stevia. I'm kind of sensitive. Yeah.
So it's the equivalent of 3 teaspoons of stevia, which I don't know that I've ever baked with stevia. And I certainly have it in my house because people sweeten their coffee with that and things like that. So I'm going to add the stevia to 3 teaspoons.
Yes. Yeah, the equivalent of. So each brand of stevia, you can look on the package. If they're little packets, each packet is the equivalent of a teaspoon. If you're using drops, you look on the bottle. And that's why we labeled it that way, because people in different countries have different access to, so I can't just say use this particular brand because people get the book all over the world. But the idea with the stevia is it kind of brings up the level of sweetness without that aftertaste that stevia can have. So it's the fruit and then a little bit of sugar, and then the stevia kind of brings up the sweetness. And then you have something that is sweet enough for American palates, but still very low in sugar.
Yeah, no, and I have a sweet tooth. Obviously, I run a baking show, but I will say I made these a couple weeks ago in preparation, and I gave them to my family. My thing is I never tell them they're gluten-free, they're sugar-free, and nobody ever says anything to me. They're like, these are really good. And then I tell them later, they're like, wow, yeah. So now that we have the dry ingredients together, can you tell me, you started to allude to this a little bit, how you kind of went through the recipe development process? Because I'm sure it's challenging for a specific, book like this, where it's about migraine relief and other relief from other chronic illnesses.
It was quite the challenge because the palette of foods to choose from is limited. There's no acids really, because they can be any fermented foods, like acidic foods can be possibly triggers. Citrus fruits can be triggers for people. So I had to be really creative. And so for this particular recipe, as I mentioned earlier, I've been kind of renovating recipes 30 plus years. And so this one actually came from a favorite podcast of mine, the Satellite Sisters.
One of my favorites too.
Love them. It's a fantastic podcast. They're super
love the Dolan
and funny, and they're great. And so their mother, Edna Dolan, they grew up in Connecticut, not very far from where I grew up. And she made these, she wasn't really a baker, but she made these blueberry muffins every 4th of July. Blueberries are in season right now, so it is a perfect summer treat, but you can also use frozen, so you can make them any time of the year. Gorgeous. I mean, the fruit is so beautiful. And so she adapted it from the New York Times. And so when I made it, I'm like, oh, well, let me turn this gluten-free. So that took a couple tries because gluten-free flour is a lot denser. So you have to adjust the liquids in the recipe. And then I like more lift. And so that's why instead of just like lightly beating the eggs, you actually use your lovely KitchenAid there and you whip them for 3 minutes. So you can do it by hand or not. But that brings lift into the batter so that when they bake, and it's a higher temperature than normal for muffins. So my editor was like, are you sure you want these at 425?
I said the same thing. I was like, 425 for muffins?
But it's to get that lift from the egg whites and the leavening, and also the sugar that helps the structure.
Great. Okay. Well, speaking of that, I have my KitchenAid here. I feel like this is in every show. I actually, right before we got on, did beat them for 3 minutes. So they're nice and creamy. So that's 3 eggs for people doing that at home. And then we also add to that a half a cup, you say either whole hemp or coconut milk. I'm going to do coconut milk.
Great. And so all the recipes are coded for special restrictive diets. So if you're dairy-free, you can look in the back and there's the list that'll tell you what all the dairy-free recipes are, or that they can be made dairy-free. If you're egg-free, that list is there. If you're eating grain-free, and then vegetarian vegan has the V on it. And so they're not all strictly vegan, but 89 of the 115 recipes can be made primarily plant-based. So for instance, this one, it can be dairy-free, but it requires the eggs. And I will say, as I was making them yesterday, you probably, if you're really good with using aquafaba instead of eggs, which is the chickpea liquid that you whip up, You could try that. I just haven't tested it, so I can't say like how much aquafaba you would use, but it's an option because you can then they could potentially be completely vegan.
Got it. We just had Margaret come on, who's one of our producers too, and she said she's catching up. She's on the West Coast too. She's catching up at 2 times speed. She's interested in this recipe. So thanks,
That's
Margaret.
Awesome. Thanks, Margaret.
Yeah. So, all right, to the wet ingredients, I'm also going to add a 1/4 cup of olive oil, right? So no butter, olive oil here.
So butter is also an option, melted butter. And olive oil we use because it's an anti-inflammatory oil. And so I do talk about that you want to try to remove the lower quality seed oils from your diet if you're dealing with any kind of inflammation, which a lot of people are. So you want to sort of remove cottonseed oil, soybean oil, which have a lot of omega-6 fatty acids, and we want to have more omega-3 fatty acids. So olive oil is a great oil. I also use coconut oil a lot in the book. And then occasionally I'll call for grapeseed, I think, because it's a higher heat oil. And unfortunately, avocados aren't on the plan because they can be a trigger for people. So otherwise I would for sure specify avocado oil.
I saw that. And also, I think like I sometimes have oat milk, but not nut milks, right? Is that true?
Yeah, so nuts can be triggers for a lot of people. So like so the book is nut free except for coconuts. So it's great for families that have peanut allergies. And all the recipes have been tested by families. So there's 40 recipe testers in 5 or 6 countries that tested the recipes. They were each tested at least 3 times by myself, and then they were sent out to at least 3 people. So I knew that they worked in home kitchens and with different kinds of equipment, and made sure that people really understood the instructions and all.
I messed up where Margaret was. Sorry, West Coast baby. We have a lot of things. It's funny though with olive oil though, because I bake a lot and I'll often throw in olive oil and stuff. Like I'm always okay with substituting. Obviously, your book is so well thought out with the specific triggers and what you're eliminating. But for people who often use substitute, I think they'll learn a lot from this book because some of the substitutes in here I wouldn't normally think of. So I'm just combining all the wet ingredients, and then I'm going to combine the dry ingredients to that and stir them together.
Great. And the only caveat I'll say about the olive oil is if you're making either of the mayonnaise recipes, so there's an egg-free mayonnaise and a regular mayonnaise, do not use regular, beautiful, green, rich olive oil because it tastes terrible as mayonnaise. You want to use the light, like Bertolli, the filtered, that's yellow in the jar. Because I had testers go, oh, well, I wanted to. I wanted to use my regular olive oil, and then they wrote me and said, you were right, it tasted terrible. Like, yes, listen to me, please. I will tell you what to use and why.
This blends together so well, and you can just mix it in by hand, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Right. So by the way, your recipe development, and I know you sent this out and tested several times. How long did this whole process of beginning to end from the book take you between the research and the recipe testing?
Yeah, some of the recipes started 6 years ago because some of them were originally intended for the first book. And then we decided we didn't want to have an overwhelming number of recipes in the first book. And I hoped that there would be a follow-up cookbook. And then the bulk of the testing, we started in the fall of 2019 for the kind of holiday Thanksgiving recipes when that stuff was in season, like the acorn squash and things like that. And then we kicked off January 2020 and everybody was going great. And then the pandemic started and I said, okay, everybody, let's take a break as nobody could go to the grocery store. And so thankfully I had a long contract for the book. So it wasn't due until May 2021. So it was a full year and a half. And so when I felt like people were sort of ready to get back into it, we were actually at the desserts chapter and everybody's like, yes, I want to make dessert. So I was able to get people to finish up the desserts and sauces and condiments. And then the photographer, I had planned on, she lives locally. I planned on going to her house and shooting with her a couple days and doing a bunch of behind the scenes footage so I could use it for promotion. And instead we were meeting at Starbucks parking lots with masks and handing stuff to each other because I pre-made some of the things for her to make her flow easier.
So you would hand her it, she would take it back, photograph it. Yeah.
Yeah. So you could totally dice up plums or apricots and sub them in this recipe, Margaret, because I have made this recipe with strawberries. I've made it with, I've made it with plums. So yeah, any stone fruit, you can just dice it up and it'll work great. It's like I said, it's a fruit you just want to, so if you're going to dice any other fruit and you don't want it like a super wet fruit, because otherwise that'll make the batter too wet. But a plum or a peach or something like that, take the skin off, dice them up, and then use the same measure. So 2.5 cups.
That's great. Okay. You took the words right out of my mouth. I have 2.5 cups of fresh blueberries here. I know you said you could use frozen. That's really good to know about all the fruits because, sometimes you don't have all the fresh fruits right there. I always have frozen fruits in my freezer because I'm always making smoothies and stuff like that. So for today, I'm putting in my fresh blueberries. They're so good this time of year where we are. So
100%. And so I actually use them straight from the bag frozen, because if you thaw them, you have to really drain them or they make the batter blue, but also they're just very wet if they've been frozen. And you could use other
Thank you for telling me that.
Yeah, you can use other berry blends as well, but just be just be aware of that. It's better to. The only thing I would say is often the frozen strawberries are very large, and I would dice those up because you don't want those huge chunks of strawberry in there if you're swapping out.
I say this on every show, but I wish you guys could smell this because it smells so good. So we have the batter ready, and now we're going to put it in the pan, right?
Yes.
So this is a question. How far so this recipe makes about 12 muffins, right?
It makes 12, as I say, generously sized muffins, which is the official yield. And so that's the yield that's used for the recipe. But I often will make 16, so they're a bit smaller. And I throw the extras in the freezer, and then I just pull them out when I want a muffin and, let it thaw or lightly microwave it. So you can, and if you make more muffins, you just need to check them after 15, 18 minutes to make sure they don't go over.
Okay. So if I'm making 12 because I pre-prepared 12.
Yes.
How high should I fill them?
So you just want to evenly distribute the batter. So it's 3/4 full is about what I did yesterday.
Okay.
For 12. Okay. I use an ice cream scoop. So one of my tips for just making life easier for baking is to buy several different sizes of ice cream scoops. You can get them. They're called dishers if you order them online. And I do actually tell you in the book what size I use. So I have one that I use for meatballs, one that I use for cookies, and one I use for muffins. And it actually fills them about 3/4 full or 2/3 full. And then all your scoops are the same size. So then it's much easier to distribute the batter more evenly.
I've done that. Those are in another drawer. I have so many ice cream scoopers. My family's like, what do we use for ice cream?
I know.
Like, these are all for baking.
That's right.
For ice cream. Yeah. That's so funny. So I also wanted to ask you, we mentioned in your bio that you host a couple shows online, right?
Yes.
Can you tell us about the Blue and Yellow Kitchen and the Resilience series and how those came to be and all the cool stuff you're doing with that?
Yeah. So the Blue and Yellow Kitchen started in May of 2020. I'm in a bunch of writing groups online, and all my friends that had books coming out, all of their book tours were canceled. And I had been doing a cooking show that I called Quarantine Kitchen as soon as we locked down in California, like the next week. Because all my work stopped because I'm a speaking coach. So all the live events were canceled. So I was like, I don't know what, I need to do something with myself. And everybody was complaining online, like, oh my God, I have to cook 3 meals a day, 7 days a week. Holy cow. Like, that's crazy. What do I do? And so I was like, well, I can help with that. And so we kind of fired up the live streaming camera that we had. And my husband was my kind of producer, cameraman. His nickname was Microwave Bob on the show. And so I was doing that. I was cooking. I was doing a show 5 days a week for a while. For like 3 months, we did about 50 episodes, and I showed people what I bought. Yeah, I would go to. Yeah, I like to shop at Trader Joe's. Yeah, it is the Ukraine flag as well. My kitchen was very bright. Had bright blue cabinets, which we hand painted, and yellow walls. And so it just, everybody commented on the kitchen constantly in the Quarantine Kitchen show. And so I was like, oh, okay. I didn't put a lot of thought into the name. It just, kind of evolved. And so I recognized that I wasn't going to be able to sustain a 5-day-a-week show for a really long time. And I started trying, like, could I have a guest? And so I was starting to cook from cookbooks that I had to kind of showcase them. And so I tried out having a guest on an iPad. So because the camera was in the back of the kitchen, and so we had to have the guest, we had to figure out the guest and how to mic the guest. And it gave us something to do, honestly.
Right.
And so when we started, and actually my first guest was Leanne Dolan of the Satellite Sisters. Her book, The Sweeney Sisters, had just come out. I made these blueberry muffins in the inaugural episode, which I was all over the place, and it's way too long, and it's fun to watch because it's
related to the show. Yeah,
it totally relates to the show. So we did. So I did a weekly show of that. We did, I think, 26 episodes, like a full old school series of television. And then I took a break, and I really worked on trying to get authors of color to support authors of color and LGBTQIA+ authors, books that weren't getting the same kind of press that a big house press can do, and really just try to support books that I've believed in. Like, I always read the book and loved the book, and I tried to choose, as the series went on, seasons 2 and 3. I tried to pick books that also would showcase a culture and learn a dish from a culture that I wasn't familiar with. And so I learned how to make a Middle Eastern dish called maqluba, which is an upside down rice dish. And so it was really amazing. Like, I did chicken congee for a book that was set in Hong Kong. And so it was fun for me because it challenged me to learn different types of cooking and really showcase those cultures, which I think is important with everything that's going on in this country. There's so much, bashing of other cultures, and especially of people who have brown skin or Asian Americans. And so I wanted to just, I think that's what Anthony Bourdain kind of did with his show, where he showed you that everybody eats and we all have families and we're not as different as we like to think. And so that was a big part of it, was to try to use my platform. And the week the show aired, when Leanne came on, was the week that George Floyd was killed. So the riots and protests the protests had just started. So Leanne and I were like, okay, there's a lot going on in the world, but we're going to make blueberry muffins and talk about this book.
That's what I was emailing you about. The Supreme Court decision came out yesterday. We're like, okay, let's make blueberry muffins.
Yes. Yeah. So, baking doesn't solve anything, but, we can only be upset and fight, and then we have to take a break, right? You have to nurture yourself. And the thing about this book, which is great, is that all the recipes support your health, right? So this is not it tastes indulgent. I'll show you the muffins again. They taste really indulgent. Like, they're yummy. You could get those at a bakery, especially with a little bit of the sugar that caramelizes on the top. I'm sorry.
Okay, tell me what I'm so interested. Tell me what we're supposed to put on top of that. A little more.
Oh, yeah. So just take about a teaspoon or so of sugar and just sprinkle the top really lightly.
Right, I'm going to use my fingers for this.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that's absolutely fine.
By the way, this baking show was kind of started by these cookies that I started making that became a little famous during the pandemic. And I wrote about them in the Huffington Post. And the secret to those cookies is you sprinkle a little bit of sea salt on top. So I never forget that last step, for sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's what makes them special. But it's nice to know you're feeding yourself and your family something that is supporting your health, as well as feeling like an indulgent treat.
I want to put these in the oven. I'm going to walk
Yes,
off.
go for it.
I haven't figured out a way to get the camera to see me and my
Well, I can talk for a moment while she's at the oven. So my new oven at my new house, these were done in 20 minutes. So I do think there's a note in there to check them after 15. So 25 to 28, but I suggest you check them after 18 to 20 just to kind of see where they're at, because it really depends. Like, people's ovens behave differently. And I didn't have anyone who tested the recipe. And I think there were 5 or 6 testers who made this because they were excited about them. I didn't have anybody tell me that they burned them, but I just also want to make sure, because you just can't control like people's ovens. And even if you have a thermometer in there and you're looking at it, maybe it's really at 425, maybe it's not. So.
And anyway. I just put this on 425 regular, not convection. How do you feel about baking non-convection?
I am not. I don't have a convection oven. Haven't worked with one except my air fryer, which is a convection oven. So I do bake a little bit in there when I'm doing like small batch things.
Right.
Because some amazing food
I don't
blogger
have
that I
it.
know
Everybody talks about
mentioned that it's actually a convection oven. I was like, what do you mean I can bake small batch brownies in my air fryer? So immediately did that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good to know. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you short about the
No.
blue and yellow. It's just interesting what you were saying. We've had some posts come up. I mean, your story sounds very similar to A Mighty Blaze. As you know, I know you know Caroline Levitt.
Yes.
The Blaze was started at the beginning of the pandemic to support authors, all different kinds of authors, all different kinds of books. And I feel like we've connected with our viewers throughout the pandemic and the George Floyd murder. And this, like, it's all, you know, sometimes we'll say to ourselves, we're interviewing authors when all this stuff is going on, but we're trying to amplify voices of people all over. We're trying to connect people. On this show in particular, we bake. And like I said before, baking can be therapeutic. And, you know, these connections I feel that we've made with people all over the country and all over the world has been meaningful for sure. So I appreciate you saying that. I feel like we're doing a little crossover today, which we're completely 100%. Aligned.
Yeah. The other show is called the Resilient series, and it actually directly relates to this cookbook. So I wanted this cookbook to have the theme of resilience, and I wanted to talk to people about their experiences. So there's a lot of people in the migraine community involved, but also I interviewed Marissa Zeppieri, who's lupus chick, and and I interviewed Cynthia Toussaint from For Grace, which is a chronic pain advocacy group. And it's they're super meaningful conversations to me. They're just a one-on-one Zoom interview. Often the people are authors, so we talk a bit about their book. And I just have found that experience super meaningful to just have this face-to-face conversation. I'm not cooking, I'm just sitting and I'm talking and I'm listening to people. And I found them really inspiring. So we've done three seasons of that. And so the first 30 or so interviews, I pulled a quote from each of those interviews, and they're in the book. And they're sprinkled throughout just to kind of inspire people. I sort of envision, you might be flipping through and maybe you're having a hard day, and then you come upon one of these quotes, and it just kind of lifts you up and helps you remember that whatever you're dealing with, whether it's chronic illness or something else, that you're not alone.
It did to me personally. I mean, I have dear friends who suffer from chronic illness, and we've often called it it's sort of like the invisible disease, because you can't see it on you. You don't know what somebody's feeling if they're feeling chronic pain. But I actually read this book recently on a plane ride home from Florida, where I was visiting my father who was, suffering from some illness. He's doing much better now, thankfully. So when I would see the quotes, I have to say I got a little teary. I think Melissa Gould from Widowish was quoted in there, and I had read her book. So like I said, the quotes were very inspiring throughout it.
Thank you.
Really,
Glenn Campbell's widow, Kim Campbell, I interviewed her, and someone who's in the kind of pro-aging community, Maddie Dykewald. And so it's a real wide range of folks that I interviewed. I interviewed a trauma therapist, Masheed Hager, who is amazing. And so all of those interviews are on my YouTube channel, and they're also on my Facebook page, Stephanie Weaver MPH, and they're also available on my Instagram, which is @SWeaverMPH. So they're all available anytime you want to go find one. And then oftentimes, a lot of the people I've interviewed have won awards. So every time they win an award, I share that, and then I share the link, say, watch their show and see them in person. And one of the authors just won a James Beard Award for his book.
Wow.
And so so it's exciting to see that. Another author, she just won best debut author of the year for the state of Georgia for her book, and The Parted Earth. So it's exciting to me to see that happen. And I had Caroline Levitt on the show when I think it was her book came out in paperback, With or Without You. It's about a woman who ends up in a coma, and then she wakes up and everything is very different in her life. And so for that, I actually invented a recipe. So sometimes if there's not a cultural connection, I'll actually invent a recipe for the book. And so it was a sensory parfait. And Caroline felt like I really kind of nailed the nature of the book with that. So that's a fun one to watch too.
Caroline for connecting us. That's
yes,
wonderful.
Absolutely. It's been fantastic.
Wait, speaking of the Brazilian series, and we're going to take some more audience questions in a sec, but I know you have a guest coming up on the next season with the book, and you talk about sort of trauma and grief, and we're going to be interviewing her too. So do you want to talk a little bit about that? Who's coming?
So season 4 is starting on July 2nd, and I have Zibby Owens coming on to talk about her memoir, Bookends, which the lovely Rachel is holding up to show you right now. Zibby's an amazing, she's an amazing author supporter. She just started her own publishing company. She's a real powerhouse. And I didn't really talk to her about any of that because there's a really strong through line in that book about grief and loss and unexpected grief. And I just thought, I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm like a kind of a dark person, but I'm like, I want to talk to Zibby about that. I don't care about the literature piece. I mean, I do, obviously. It's a great book.
I'm the same way. If you want to talk about grief and loss at a party, come talk to me.
Yeah, I'm your girl, right? So Melissa Gould's book about losing her husband unexpectedly. I'm not afraid to go there because I've experienced a lot of grief and loss, and as well living with chronic illness for close on 30 years now. You have to grieve a lot of things that you can't do or that your body won't let you do anymore. And it's how do you find that balance of living in the present and being present and having a joyful, beautiful life? I think a lot of that is building resilience. And so that's why the theme of the book is resilience. And the series has been so meaningful to me that I just, even though the book is done and there's no more quotes to put in it, I just continued it because the conversations have been so rich.
Yeah. Well, thank you for saying that. I mean, I just finished Bookends by Zibby, and she's actually coming on A Mighty Blaze this Friday at 4 p.m. I'm interviewing her, and we're going to talk about this. As a side note, she and her sister-in-law, Stephanie Owens, came on the baking show a year ago. We baked coffee cake together that Stephanie started business, but we did talk a lot about grief and loss. And I'm just going to plug it now while we're talking about our next baking show after this one is at a special time and day. It's on Wednesday, July 13th at 1 p.m. We're going to be talking with Rebecca Soffer, who I feel like I want to connect you to. She founded this organization called Modern Loss after losing both of her parents when she was in her late 20s, early 30s. And this is her second book. It's called The Modern Loss Handbook. She's been all over the place with it, doing really amazing work. And believe it or not, she talks a lot about grief and loss. She's also one of the funniest people you'll ever meet because she used to work for the Colbert Report. And we're going to make zucchini bread, which is something that her mother used to make. So sorry to do that cross promotion, but we were on the topic. I think there is this tension between writers writing about what they've suffered through and also the creative side of baking too, for sure. And cooking.
I think it's not an accident that everybody was making sourdough during the pandemic, right? There's something so visceral about being in the kitchen, working with dough, I know somebody who just like became an amazing cake baker, and she was just posting these unbelievably decorated cakes that she just was making at home, and then giving away to neighbors. And so I do feel like it has this element of sharing and love and generosity and hospitality to it. And because the pandemic sort of took all that away in one week, I think people really were drawn to it. And I still know somebody that has not given up her sourdough. She's still posting, she's still making sourdough. She got incredibly good at it. Her stuff, she's doing these braided loaves and all these different things. And so, it's something where even as life has now come back to, or is now in its new normal. I don't think anything is going to be normal ever again. But, I hope that people haven't lost the satisfaction of what it means to cook for yourself. And part of what I did with this book was really listen to my readers. So before I started the official recipe development phase, I did a survey with my readers and said, what do you need? What does the first book not have that you need? And they said, more snacks. So here we go. This is your lovely snack.
The snacks are great because I said this before we went on air. Often when you're eating certain foods, the meals can be easy, but the snacks are hard. And the snacks are when you're hungry at 3:00 in the afternoon, you grab a handful of whatever you're supposed to not grab a handful of. So I really appreciated the snacks in here, like the granola bars and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and the creamy Nutella carob butter, which is a play on Nutella, was actually from the first book. It was one of the one of the most popular recipes in that book. And the reason we kind of reshared it was because it also makes an amazing sorbet in your food processor with fresh berries or frozen berries. So you just throw that in with the frozen berries. It's not a pretty dessert. Actually, it was the only dessert that Laura made and sent me pictures as she was shooting. And I was like, oh my God, that looks terrible. And she's like, because they sort of almost look like meatballs as she had it stacked up. And so we ended up shooting the strawberry sorbet instead. But it's very tasty. It was a complete accident. I had some leftover Nutella butter and I had frozen, strawberries or something, and I threw them in the food processor and I was like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. Because it tastes like chocolate, that chocolate berry combo that can be really wonderful. But we use carob powder instead of cocoa powder because chocolate can be a trigger for some people.
Yes. I love the recipe for trail mix too, because I often make my own trail mix.
Yes.
And that's
so
great to have baggies and take with you. And I always make it in a big Ziploc baggie and then I put it in little ones.
Perfect.
So
absolutely.
We're this time is going by so fast. I feel like I could talk to you forever. I know we've had some viewer questions. I don't know if we have any more viewer questions to pop up, Michelle, but if not, we can go on. I think we might be good with our questions for now.
So I did want to talk a little bit about triggers while we're waiting to see if there's any questions, because triggers, favorite recipes in the book. Favorite recipe is, the cover, besides the blueberry muffins, the cover is the carrot ginger soup, and it is incredible. I'll be making it next week for another show. And I'll be giving it away to neighbors because my new freezer is not as big as my old freezer. So it's like velvety, and it has this rich combination of turmeric and ginger, and you use leeks in there. So it helps people kind of get introduced to leeks, which have this, other beautiful flavor that's very savory and has that umami quality to it. I love the roasted potatoes are so simple. But there's that recipe, that chapter is actually my favorite chapter because it's the progressive recipes chapter. So there's 3 base recipes. There's roasted chicken, roasted potatoes, and then how to make dried beans, which I call beanie brothy deliciousness. And then there's 3 to 4 recipes that you can use the leftovers with. So so the Thai style shrimp curry uses the leftover potatoes, and there's a beautiful 2 different kinds of soups that you can use with the chicken. And then I show you how to use the chicken bones to make broth, and then you can use that again. So it's kind of this sort of circle of life. The dried beans actually.
It's great. Someone just asked me who came up with that concept.
So I've always done it, but I read a book by Kathleen Flynn, and the name is just escaping me at the moment, the Kitchen Counter Cooking School. And she talked about the problem of food waste in the United States, and that we're actually throwing away about 30% of all of the edible food due to various kinds of waste. Meaning if you spend $10 on groceries or $100 on groceries, you're throwing away $30 of food every week. Wow. Which I can't afford to do, and especially with everything, all the prices going up. So I got really serious about figuring out my own food waste issues, like what was I not getting to, what was I not using, what could I freeze that I didn't realize I could freeze. And so I talk about all of that in the first book. There's a whole chapter about using leftovers. So how to make a quiche from a little bit of, if you've got Chinese food, or how to make a frittata, or how to make patties out of a few random items. And it's my favorite way of cooking, really. And so I wanted to sort of amplify that in this book. So that's why I did the progressive chapter. And again, it's one of my favorites because I think, there's very few people that can afford to throw away food, right? We're a rich country, but so I just wanted to really show people how to do that so that they could start to incorporate that in their own lives. Do I prefer cooking or baking? I do way more cooking than baking because there's just 2 of us, but in my household, but I do love to bake, but I'm not I don't do cakes really. I'm not like a fancy, I don't do I'm terrible with frosting. I will make a cake for my husband's birthday. And it's really good. It's on my blog. But, you know, that's, but I do love baking cookies. And so that I'll do fairly often because I can throw them in the freezer. And these do freeze well. These blueberry muffins do freeze.
I did freeze them the last time I made them. I always have baked goods in my freezer.
Yeah, because, you know, you don't necessarily need to have 24, but, you know, in the afternoon, you want to pull them out and say, you know, I can let this thaw and then enjoy it. So how did I develop the recipes? Well, the inspiration came from all over the place. Food blogs, magazines. Well, a lot of the food magazines have closed now, but I was constantly pulling out like, oh, that could be adapted. One of the recipes came actually out of my Facebook support group. So you just search Migraine Relief Plan on Facebook and you can join it. And somebody said, hey, I just saw this recipe for taqueria style guacamole that doesn't have avocado. Is this plan friendly? And I thought, what is that? Well, it's made from a Mexican squash that looks like a silver gray zucchini. And a lot of taquerias, especially in LA, will use it as sort of a guac substitute because it's much cheaper to make than guacamole. And it happened to be very close to the plan restrictions already. So I played around with that and the recipe testers made it and everybody loved it. And granted, avocados are fantastically healthy food. And if they don't bother you after you go through the testing period, please add them back into your diet. They're delicious. They're so good for you. The fats are really good for you. But that's how a lot of the recipes came about was, or someone would ask me, they said, yeah, I need a granola bar. I need granola. I need more soups. I need this or that. And so I would, you know, look, and often I just make stuff up myself. If I go to the farmer's market and there's some beautiful kind of produce, I'll say, well, I wonder what I could do with that. Or how can I make roasted cauliflower more interesting? And I'll play around with that and within the confines of the restrictions of this diet. So bananas and all citrus fruits and most tropical fruits are not on the plan until you test them because they can. So the reason that food, I was going to talk about food triggers.
I was going to say, we're going to get back to triggers if you want to talk about.
Yeah, let me talk about that. So the diet that I was introduced to by my doctor was based on the assumption that foods can cause attacks. There is some research around that, and there's a lot of controversy around that. But because I have always sort of sought to look at food myself and see how can I adjust it for, you know, inflammatory stuff and things like that, it made sense to me that it's something we can control as well. I can't control the weather, but I can control what I put in my mouth. So the idea with triggers is not that they cause migraine disease, because you have migraine disease. It's a genetic condition. It's a neurobiological condition. But what we understand now is that these different triggers kind of stack up. And so people have what they think is like a threshold. And so if you stay below the threshold, you're going to have fewer attacks, not no attacks, but fewer. And so the idea is if you can raise your threshold by eating these differently, anti-inflammatory, getting regular sleep, hydrating throughout the day, making sure you're drinking enough water, getting some kind of gentle movement in your life, some kind of relaxation practice, whatever that looks like for you. All of those things have been researched and pretty much all migraine doctors agree on. Not all migraine doctors agree that there are food triggers. But you talk to any person with migraines and they will say, and I'm one of those people. So for me, it was super clear. If I eat a certain kind of cheese, I have a headache in like 3 bites. Mm-hmm. Sip of wine, I'm done. So those fermented foods for me are an issue. But most of the other foods that are not on the plan initially didn't bother me. For me, the way that I approached this was if I can figure out how to reduce. So when I was diagnosed, I had a headache every day and I was having 3 to 5 migraine days a week. So I was in the almost pretty much chronic stage by the time I was diagnosed. When I figured out the plan for myself, got on it, also was on some medication, I went down to no headaches every day and 1 to 3 days a month. So not everyone responds the way I do. I don't promise that for anyone. It's not a cure. But if you were able to make the lifestyle adjustments, and start to understand, like for me, bright sunlight on certain days is a huge trigger. I can't control that, except I have migraine glasses that I can wear. I can wear a hat, you know, and I finally figured out the reason I always got a terrible headache when I traveled is because the lighting in airports is terrible. So now I have this cute hat and my migraine glasses that I wear in the airport. So you can adjust. And I tinted the windows on my car. So because I live in Southern California, it's bright and sunny most of the time.
Right.
So all those things, this is a disease that is super unpredictable. And so it's very frustrating because you can make plans and then you feel terrible and you can't go. So my feeling is the more things that I can adjust and feel in somewhat control of, I can't prevent all my attacks. I can't make the disease go away, but I can do those things. And having agency, I think, is really important in life in general. So that's the story about triggers.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's great. And this is sort of a great point as we wrap up, because we've talked about this book a lot. In the beginning, you really lay that out. What could be the triggers, how to start, so that it's not so overwhelming, so that you don't feel like, okay, tomorrow I need to change everything. Yeah. It's a gradual process. It makes sense. Everybody's different. So for example, you may be able to eat avocados, or, you know, examples like that. So I thought it was just really well laid out, and I'm so excited to try these blueberry muffins. I think they're going to be ready in a minute.
That's so great. So being a wellness coach and having the Masters of Public Health, and I've been working on behavior change stuff for years in different jobs. Nobody changes behavior overnight. The estimates are 21 to 30 to 60 days, right? So there's just one task a week. You don't even start changing your food until week 3 or 4, and then we start with snacks. So by the time you get to 8 weeks, you're actually on the plan. And then I recommend staying on the strict version of the plan for 3 to 4 months, and then adding foods back in one at a time so you can see if they bother you or not. I do need to say, though, if you have any kind of disordered eating in your past, be really careful about this, because an elimination diet can trigger disordered eating. And for sure, work with a nutritionist who's expert in that, who can help guide you. You can certainly follow the recipes and just ignore the plan advice. And I have a lot of friends who are saying, "Oh my gosh, you know, the food is so incredible. I don't have migraines, but I'm going to cook from this all the time." So that makes me feel really great, because that was the goal. The whole family could enjoy.
Well, I was thinking that as I was reading that too. I was like, I'm going to make this. You know, it's not like you have to make this for one reason. That's really interesting. I so appreciate your time with us today. And we have links in the show, and this is going to live on YouTube forever. So people can go back to pre-order Stephanie's book, check out the Blue and Yellow Kitchen, check out the Resilience series, check out her blog. There's a lot of great content out there. And we're just so happy you were here. Before we go, I just want to say what's coming up this week on The Blaze. I talked about this Friday, Zippy Owens at 4 p.m. In the meantime, on the podcast, which is released on Sundays, we have Tom Parada. On Crime Time on Tuesday, we have Kate White. We have a special cocktail event this Tuesday night with Nicola Harrison in honor of her paperback coming out. On Litfic on Wednesday, we have Alexa Shakin. Authors Love Bookstore also on Wednesday. We have Catherine Raven. Zeitgeist on Thursday, Dana Suskin. And then Lit Chick is on Friday with Natalie Jenner at noon, followed by The Frontliner with Zibby. So we have a really busy summer week coming up, which is great.
Amazing.
So you can check that out. And Stephanie, thanks for coming on. Thanks to Caroline for connecting us.
Absolutely.
Thanks to Michelle for doing all our behind the scenes producing. And we'll see you guys next time right here on Blaze Baking with Rach. Thank you.
Thanks, Rach.
Thanks.